It started with the package. Thursday evening, after an exhausting day of grinding out estimates for clients who couldn't decide between mulch or stone, I was halfway through a beer when the doorbell rang. Sam was upstairs grading papers, and our kids were at their friends' houses. Max, our overenthusiastic golden retriever, barked his way to the door. I pulled it open, expecting Amazon or some kids selling cookies. Instead, there was a brown box sitting on the doormat. No address, no name, no postage. The only marking was a post-it note on top, "You need to know." I glanced up and down the street. Empty. Our quiet suburban block was all trees and stillness, save for the occasional car rolling by. Whoever dropped it off was long gone. I picked up the package, hesitating. It wasn't heavy, felt like clothes or papers inside. My first instinct was to toss it. Maybe some prank from the neighborhood teens. But curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and sliced the tape. Inside was a stack of glossy photos and a manila envelope. Max wagged his tail as I sifted through the pictures. At first, I didn't get it. The photos were of a hotel lobby I didn't recognize, crowded with strangers. Then I saw her, Sam. She was standing near the reception desk, talking to a man I didn't know. His hand was on her lower back. Close. Familiar. They were both smiling, and the next photo showed them walking toward the elevator together. My stomach clenched as I flipped through more images. The timestamps in the bottom corner were all from last weekend, when she was supposedly visiting her sister in Asheville. What was this? Who sent it? And most importantly, why? The envelope had my name scribbled on the front. Inside was a single typed sheet of paper. "Your wife has been lying to you. This isn't the first time. Be smart." I closed the package, my hands trembling as I shoved it onto the counter. The photos stared at me like evidence in a courtroom. Sam and this unknown man laughing, touching, together. It was impossible to deny what I'd seen. But denial would have been easier. Safer. I stood there in the kitchen for what felt like an eternity, the hum of the refrigerator my only company. I considered leaving it there, pretending I hadn't opened it, pretending I hadn't seen anything. But whoever sent it wasn't going to let me do that. Be smart, the note had said. It was a taunt as much as a warning. What did they mean? This isn't the first time. How much had I missed? And who the hell sent this? I pulled out the pictures again, this time laying them flat on the counter. There were 12 of them, all taken at slightly different angles. Someone had been thorough. The man in the photos was taller than Sam, maybe by a few inches, with neatly combed hair and a sharp suit. He looked older than me, maybe in his early 50s. Businessman type. And then it hit me, her conferences. Sam had been traveling more in the past year, attending education workshops and professional development sessions. I joked that she was becoming a corporate teacher, jet-setting to network while I stayed back and made sure the house didn't burn down. I'd always trusted her completely. Why wouldn't I? She was the most grounded, reliable person I knew. At least, that's what I thought. I heard her footsteps on the stairs and shoved the package into the pantry. My heartbeat spiked as she walked into the kitchen, her hair tied back, a red pen in hand. She looked at me, then at the counter. "What's up?" she asked casually, reaching for the fridge. "Nothing," I said, too quickly. "You want a drink?" She raised an eyebrow. "It's a school night." "You're grading," I countered. "You deserve one." Her laugh was light and disarming, and for a split second, I doubted everything. Maybe there was an innocent explanation for the pictures. Maybe she was at a conference, and this man was just a colleague. But the way she moved so easily around the kitchen, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, made it hard to breathe. I felt like I was choking on the lie that suddenly felt like our entire marriage. I needed answers, but I wasn't going to get them by asking outright. Not yet. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photos again. Sam with him. The timestamp. The elevator. The next morning, after she left for work, I went straight to her office upstairs. I didn't even feel guilty. This was my life now, snooping through my wife's things, looking for proof of something I didn't want to believe. Her laptop was locked, but her calendar sat open on her desk, the pages marked with her neat handwriting. I flipped back to last weekend. Sure enough, Asheville was written in blue ink. I scanned her desk, searching for anything else that might confirm or disprove what I'd seen. Nothing. No receipts, no notes, no stray business cards. Just a tidy, organized workspace. But then I remembered her email. Sam was terrible about changing her passwords, and I had logged into her email years ago to fix an issue with her phone. It had been the same ever since. I took my laptop and sat down, entering her email address and password. It worked. Her inbox opened up, and I was staring at the neatly categorized folders she loved so much. Work, personal, receipts, and a few others. I clicked on personal first, but it was just birthday invites, photos from her sister, and emails from the kids' teachers. Then I saw it, a folder labeled Archive. It was subtle, tucked under the other folders, almost like an afterthought. I clicked on it and was greeted with a list of emails, most of them innocuous. But halfway down, one caught my eye: Weekend Recap. It was from a name I didn't recognize, Greg Thomas. I clicked on it. The email was short and to the point. Sam. Thanks for making the weekends so special. I can't stop thinking about our time together. You're incredible, as always. Let me know when we can meet again. Greg. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. There it was, in black and white. No ambiguity. No misunderstanding. I felt sick, like someone had punched me in the stomach and knocked all the air out. I wanted to slam the laptop shut, throw it across the room, but I couldn't. I needed more. I opened her sent folder, scrolling frantically. There were replies, short, careful, and devoid of anything incriminating. But that didn't matter. The email I'd read was enough. Who the hell was Greg Thomas? And how long had this been going on? I went back to the inbox, searching for his name. There were more emails, all archived, all written in the same careful, restrained tone. But there was one thing they all had in common: Greg's name, signed at the bottom. Then I found the smoking gun, a forwarded hotel reservation. The subject line read, "For this weekend." It was from 2 weeks ago, right before her trip to Asheville. The reservation was for a hotel in Charlotte. Not Asheville. My hand shook as I printed out the emails and put them in the same envelope as the photos. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I needed everything in one place. It was like preparing for a battle I didn't even want to fight. By the time Sam got home, I had made up my mind. I wasn't ready to confront her, not until I had more answers. But I couldn't pretend everything was normal either. She came into the living room, smiling like nothing was wrong. I watched her, wondering how she could look so casual, so normal, when my entire world was on the verge of collapse. "You okay?" she asked, sitting down beside me. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah. Just tired." She kissed my cheek, and I wanted to scream. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, pretending everything was fine, while my mind raced with plans for what came next. The following days were a blur of tension. I acted like nothing had changed, but every interaction with Sam felt forced, like playing a part in a play I hadn't rehearsed. The knowledge of her betrayal gnawed me constantly, and the photos, emails, and reservation confirmation burned a hole in the envelope hidden under my toolbox in the garage. I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted the truth. No half explanations or carefully worded excuses. Just the truth. Friday night gave me the perfect opportunity. The kids were staying with my sister for the weekend, and Sam had no work commitments. She had been chirpy all day, asking what I wanted to do that evening. I played along, suggesting we stay in, have dinner, and watch a movie. She agreed, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself this was just another regular night. It wasn't. After dinner, I told her I'd clean up while she picked a movie. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and wandered off to the living room. I dried the last plate and stared at the reflection in the kitchen window. I looked like hell. Bags under my eyes, jaw tight, shoulders hunched forward like I was carrying the weight of something unbearable. I wiped my hands and reached for the envelope. When I walked into the living room, Sam was curled up on the couch, scrolling through streaming options. She looked up and patted the cushion next to her. I stayed standing. "Jason," she asked, tilting her head. "Everything okay?" "No," I said. "Not really." Her smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of concern. "What's wrong?" I tossed the envelope onto the coffee table. It landed with a thud, and she stared at it like it might bite her. Her confusion was genuine, at first. She reached for it slowly, like she was handling something fragile. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." She gave me a quick, searching glance, but I didn't move. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out the contents. The photos came first. Her eyes widened as she shuffled through them, her face draining of color. Then the emails, her mouth moving silently as she skimmed the words. I stayed silent, watching every flicker of emotion cross her face: shock, confusion, realization, and then something that might have been fear. When she finally looked up, her eyes were glassy. "Jason, I can." "Don't lie," I interrupted. My voice was low, but it cut through the room like a knife. "Don't waste my time with lies." She closed her mouth, her hands gripping the edges of the papers so hard they crumpled. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. "It's not what you think," she finally said. I laughed bitterly. "Really? So you weren't in a hotel in Charlotte with another man last weekend?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. The silence was answer enough. "Who is he?" I demanded. "How long has this been going on?" "Jason, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Can we talk about this calmly?" "Calmly?" I snapped. "You've been lying to me for God knows how long, and now you want calm? Start talking." She set the papers down and buried her face in her hands. "It's not what you think," she repeated, her voice muffled. He's a colleague." It wasn't supposed to happen." "But it did," I said coldly. "What, you tripped and fell into his hotel room?" Her head shot up, eyes red. "It wasn't like that." She stopped, as if realizing the futility of her words. "It just happened." "That's not an explanation," I said, my tone flat. "That's an excuse." She stood abruptly, pacing the room with her arms wrapped around herself. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, her voice rising. "I didn't plan it. It was one mistake." I shook my head. "Stop lying, Sam. One mistake doesn't explain months of emails, pictures, hotel reservations." "How long?" She stopped pacing and turned to face me. Her expression was a mixture of guilt and defiance. 6 months. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. 6 months. Half a year of deception, sneaking around, and pretending everything was fine. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What did I do to deserve this?" "It wasn't about you," she said quickly. "It was never about you. That's supposed to make me feel better?" I snapped. "You tore our family apart because it wasn't about me?" Tears streamed down her face now, but I felt no sympathy. She reached out as if to touch me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't you dare." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The weight of what had been said and what hadn't hung heavy in the room. Finally, she sat down on the edge of the couch, her head in her hands. "I don't know what you want me to say," she whispered. "The truth," I said. "For once in this entire marriage, just tell me the truth." She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I was lonely," she admitted. "You were always busy with work, the kids, everything. I felt invisible." I stared at her, my anger boiling over. So instead of talking to me, instead of fixing things, you decided to screw some guy from work? She flinched at my words but didn't argue. I made a mistake, she said. I regret it more than you can imagine. Regret? I laughed bitterly. You regret getting caught. That's not the same thing. She tried to plead her case, talking about feelings of neglect and wanting to feel desired. But her words were empty. There was no justification for what she had done. None. By the end of the night, I was drained, physically and emotionally. She begged me not to make any rash decisions, not to tell the kids yet. I told her to sleep in the guest room. I'll never forgive you for this, I said as she walked away. Her shoulders sagged, but she didn't argue. When the door closed behind her, I sank into the couch, staring at the photos still spread across the coffee table. The truth was out, but it didn't feel like a victory. If anything, it felt like a loss of the life I thought we had, the person I thought she was, and the trust that had held us together for 14 years. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't know how I could. The day after the confrontation, Sam acted like a ghost haunting the house. She moved quietly, her footsteps barely audible, her presence barely noticeable. She tried to speak a few times, her words hesitant and stammering, but I wasn't interested in hearing anything else from her. Not apologies. Not excuses. Nothing. That morning, I went straight to my garage and sat at my workbench, staring at the envelope I had hidden the night before. It wasn't just evidence of her betrayal anymore, it was ammunition. For the first time since discovering her affair, I felt a sense of control. If she wanted to destroy the life we'd built together, she wasn't going to walk away unscathed. I started by calling my lawyer, Tom Whitaker. He wasn't just my attorney, he was a family friend and someone I could trust completely. The moment I explained what I had discovered, his voice turned professional and sharp. Jason, listen carefully, he said. Do not let her know what you're planning. Act normal, keep things steady, and let me handle the legal side. We'll make sure you're protected, but you need to gather every piece of evidence you can. I've got plenty already, I said, glancing at the envelope. Photos, emails, hotel reservations. Enough to prove the affair. Good, Tom said. But it's not just about proving infidelity. We need to think about custody, finances, and your reputation. Keep your head on straight. He was right. As much as I wanted to lash out, to confront her again, or even to call this Greg Thomas and tear into him, I had to play it smart. So, I focused on the plan. I spent the next few days gathering every piece of evidence I could find. I scoured her email for more incriminating messages, cross-referenced her travel itineraries, and even checked her credit card statements for charges that didn't align with the stories she'd told me. It was tedious and infuriating, but every new detail only fueled my resolve. Meanwhile, I kept up the facade of normalcy. I went to work, cooked dinner, and even engaged in small talk when necessary. Sam seemed to believe I was cooling down, that the worst of my anger had passed. She didn't realize I was preparing for the next phase. By midweek, I was ready to take my first real step. I reached out to Greg Thomas. It wasn't difficult to find his contact information, he was listed on the company website where Sam worked. I sent him an email from a burner account, keeping it short and direct. Greg. I know about the affair. You've made this personal. I suggest you meet me in person to discuss how we handle this, or I'll escalate the situation. Your choice. I didn't expect a response right away, but I didn't have to wait long. That evening, I received a reply. I'm sorry for what's happened. Let's meet. I don't want to make things worse. We agreed on a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. I didn't tell Sam where I was going or what I was doing, and she didn't ask. Greg was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived. He looked nervous, shifting in his chair and glancing at the door every few seconds. He stood when he saw me, extending a hand I had no intention of shaking. Jason, he said, his voice uncertain. Thanks for meeting me. I sat down without responding, folding my arms as I stared him down. He looked uncomfortable, his polished suit and professional demeanor clashing with the guilt written all over his face. "Let's make this quick," I said. "Why?" He swallowed hard, looking down at his coffee. "I don't have a good answer," he admitted. "It wasn't planned. It just happened." I clenched my jaw. "Don't insult my intelligence. Affairs don't just happen. You made a choice." "So did she." Greg nodded, his expression pained. "You're right. I won't deny that. I take full responsibility." "Responsibility?" I scoffed. "You think saying that fixes anything? Do you have any idea what you've done to my family?" "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know that doesn't mean much, but I truly am." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to end this immediately. No contact, no messages, nothing. You'll cut her out of your life completely, and if I find out otherwise, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done." His eyes widened. "Everyone?" "Your wife, your boss, your colleagues. I've got the evidence, and I'm not afraid to use it." Greg hesitated, then nodded. "I understand. It's over. I'll stay away." I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "See that you do," I said, my voice cold. "Because if I have to come back here, it won't be to talk." The next step was harder, confronting Sam at a deeper level, in a way she wouldn't forget. That Friday evening, after the kids were asleep, I called her into the living room. She looked hesitant, her movements tentative as she sat across from me. "Jason," she began, I talked to Greg," I interrupted. Her eyes widened, and her face went pale. You did?" "Yes." "It's over," I said firmly. He agreed to cut ties completely. "But that doesn't change what you did." She looked down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I've hurt you. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. "You don't get to decide how this gets fixed." "I do." "Okay," she said quickly. "Anything. Just tell me what to do." "First, you're moving out," I said. "You can stay at your sister's for now. The kids will stay with me until we figure out the long-term arrangement." Her mouth opened in protest, but she stopped herself. "Okay," she said finally. "If that's what you want." "It's not what I want," I snapped. "But it's what's happening." By the end of the weekend, she was gone. The house felt quieter, emptier, but also lighter. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't done, there were still legal battles to fight, custody to sort out, and emotional wounds that wouldn't heal overnight. But I'd taken the first steps. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned, but it was mine to rebuild. And I intended to do it on my terms. The first few days after Sam moved out were surreal. The house was eerily quiet without her. The kids, thankfully, weren't home yet, they were still with my sister. I'd wanted it that way. I needed space to think, to feel everything I'd been suppressing, to figure out what came next. On Monday morning, I met with my lawyer, Tom, in his office. His demeanor was calm and professional, a sharp contrast to the storm still raging inside me. "Jason," he began, sliding a folder across the desk, "I've reviewed the evidence you provided. It's more than enough to establish fault in a divorce. But we need to discuss what you want out of this: custody, division of assets, alimony." "Custody is non-negotiable," I said immediately. "The kids stay with me." Tom nodded. "And the house?" "I'm keeping it," I said firmly. "It's their home. I won't uproot them because of her mistakes." "Understood," he said. "As for alimony, Sam's earning potential isn't as high as yours. The court may still award her something, but will argue to keep it minimal given the circumstances." "Fine," I said, though the idea of giving her another cent made my stomach churn. "What about her job?" "She works with this guy." "Can we make that an issue?" Tom paused, considering. We can raise it, but forcing her to leave her job might be tricky. What we can do is emphasize the impact of the affair on your family and use it to strengthen your custody claim. I nodded, absorbing the information. It felt cold, calculated, but necessary. This wasn't just about the legal process, it was about protecting my kids, ensuring they didn't suffer more than they already would. Jason, Tom said, his voice softer now, I know this is hell. But you're handling it the right way. Keep your focus on the big picture. Don't let her drag you into emotional battles. That's where people make mistakes. I left his office with a stack of paperwork and a renewed sense of purpose. The emotional fallout could wait. Right now, I needed to stay sharp. The opportunity for emotional closure came sooner than I expected. That evening, Sam called and asked to come by. Her voice was subdued, almost timid, and I could hear the strain in it. Jason, she said, we need to talk. Not about logistics or lawyers, about us. Please. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to refuse. But some part of me, whether it was curiosity, anger, or something I couldn't name, wanted to hear what she had to say. I agreed, setting a time for the next evening. When she arrived, she looked different. There was no makeup, no polished appearance, just a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. She hesitated in the doorway, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Come in, I said curtly, stepping aside. She walked into the living room and stood awkwardly, like a guest in her own home. I gestured for her to sit, but remained standing. I wanted the psychological advantage, even if I wasn't sure why. She took a deep breath, her hands twisting in her lap. First, I want to say I'm sorry, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Not just for what I did, but for how I hurt you and the kids. I know I can't undo any of it, but I needed you to know that. I stayed silent, my arms crossed as I waited for her to continue. I've been thinking a lot, she said. About us, about everything that led to this. And I realize now how much I took for granted. I was selfish, Jason. I let my own feelings of inadequacy and loneliness cloud everything. And instead of talking to you, I made the worst mistake of my life. Why now? I asked, my voice hard. Why are you saying all this now, when it's too late? She flinched but didn't look away. Because I needed to face the truth, she said. And because I want to try to salvage what's left of our relationship. Even if we can't fix it, I don't want to be your enemy. I laughed bitterly. Salvage? Sam, you didn't just break our marriage, you burned it to the ground. There's nothing left to salvage. Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. Not anymore. I deserve that, she said quietly. But Jason, please. Can we at least find a way to move forward? For the kids? The kids, I repeated, my tone icy. You mean the ones you didn't think about while sneaking off to a hotel with Greg Thomas? Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might break down completely. But she held herself together, wiping her eyes as she took a shaky breath. You're right, she said. I didn't think. I was selfish, and I hate myself for it. But I love them, Jason. And I love you. Don't, I snapped. Don't you dare say that. You don't love me. You love the idea of me, the stability, the security. If you loved me, this wouldn't have happened. She nodded, accepting the blow. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. But I want to be here for the kids. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that. You'll prove it in court, I said coldly. Because that's where this is headed. The conversation dragged on, covering the same ground in circles. She begged for understanding, for some semblance of civility, but I had nothing left to give. By the time she left, I felt drained, like every ounce of anger and pain had been wrung out of me. I sat in the quiet living room, staring at the spot where she'd sat, and wondered if I'd made a mistake. Not in confronting her, not in ending the marriage, but in letting her back into the house, even for a conversation. Every word she'd said felt like manipulation, like an attempt to regain some control. And I was done being controlled. That night, I called Tom and told him to move forward with the divorce filing. There was no room for second guessing now. I needed to protect myself, my kids, and whatever future I could still salvage from the wreckage of my life. The finality of the decision felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, I slept. The day I filed for divorce, it felt both like the end of something I'd built with my own hands and the beginning of something I hadn't chosen but had to face head on. I dropped the paperwork off at Tom's office, signed where I needed to, and left without looking back. There was no grand sense of relief or catharsis, just a heavy weight in my chest. A quiet resolve. That evening, I sat down with the kids. Emma and Nathan had come home the day before, and I knew it was time. I couldn't shield them from the truth much longer, but I wasn't going to tell them everything. They deserved honesty, not cruelty. We sat in the living room, the TV off, the air thick with tension. Emma, at 13, looked at me with those wide, questioning eyes that had always been too perceptive for her age. Nathan, 11, fiddled with a thread on his hoodie, avoiding eye contact. They knew something was wrong. Kids, I began, my voice steady despite the storm inside, I need to talk to you about something important. Emma's gaze didn't waver. Is it about Mom? She asked softly. I nodded. Yes, it is. Your mom and I. We've decided to separate. Nathan's head shot up, his eyes wide with fear. Separate? You mean you're getting divorced? Yes, I said, keeping my tone calm. We are. But this has nothing to do with you. Your mom and I both love you very much, and that's never going to change. But why? Emma asked, her voice cracking. Why are you getting divorced? It was the question I'd been dreading. I had rehearsed my answer a dozen times, trying to find the right balance between truth and protection. Sometimes, grown-ups make mistakes, I said carefully. And those mistakes can hurt the people they love. Your mom and I have been struggling for a while, and we've decided this is the best thing for everyone. Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, her jaw tight. Nathan, on the other hand, stared at me like I'd just told him the sky wasn't blue. Is it because of us? He asked, his voice barely audible. No, I said firmly. This has nothing to do with you. Nothing. Your mom and I both agree on that. Then why can't you fix it? Emma demanded, her voice rising. You always said we're supposed to fix things when they're broken. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Sometimes, things can't be fixed, Emma. And trying to hold on to something broken can hurt even more. This isn't what I wanted, but it's what we need to do. Nathan started crying then, silent tears rolling down his cheeks. I reached out to him, pulling him into a hug. He clung to me tightly, and Emma sat stiffly beside us, her arms crossed and her face turned away. Are we going to have to move? Nathan asked, his voice muffled against my chest. No, I assured him. This is your home. You're staying here. I promise. The conversation lasted over an hour, the kids cycling through tears, questions, and anger. I answered everything as honestly as I could without dragging Sam through the mud. They didn't need to know the details. Not yet. Maybe not ever. When it was over, they both retreated to their rooms, leaving me alone in the living room. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty couch where Sam used to sit. The next morning, Sam called to check on the kids. I handed them the phone without saying a word, watching as they both answered her questions with short, clipped responses. They weren't ready to forgive her, and I didn't blame them. When they handed the phone back, she asked to speak to me. Jason, she said, her voice tentative. How did it go? They know, I said flatly. They're hurt, confused, and angry. What did you expect? She sighed heavily. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't want to hear that again, I said. Your apologies don't mean anything to me anymore. There was a long pause. Can I come by to see them tomorrow? I'll ask them, I said. If they want to see you, fine. But this is their decision, not mine. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. I hung up without saying goodbye. In the days that followed, I threw myself into work. My landscaping business had always been my pride and joy, and now it was my refuge. Every task, no matter how small, became a way to channel my anger and frustration. By the end of each day, I was too exhausted to think about Sam or the mess she'd left behind. The kids adjusted slowly. Emma threw herself into soccer practice, while Nathan buried himself in his video games. They were coping in their own ways, but I could see the cracks. I did my best to fill the gaps, to be both parents at once, but there were moments when their sadness felt like a mirror reflecting my own. One evening, a week after Sam's visit to the house, Emma came into the kitchen while I was making dinner. She sat at the counter, watching me silently for a while before speaking. Dad, she said hesitantly, do you think you'll ever forgive Mom? The question caught me off guard. I set down the knife I was using and turned to face her. Why do you ask? She shrugged, looking down at her hands. I don't know. I'm mad at her, but I also miss her. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense, I said, sitting down across from her. You love your mom, and it's okay to be mad at someone you love. It's okay to miss her too. But do you? She pressed. Do you think you'll forgive her? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Emma, forgiveness isn't something that happens overnight. Right now, I don't know if I can forgive her. Maybe someday. But not today. She nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. I think I want to see her, she said finally. I miss talking to her. Then you should, I said. If that's what you want, I'll make it happen. The weeks turned into months, and the pieces of our lives began to fall into a new kind of order. The divorce was finalized quietly, with Sam agreeing to my terms without a fight. She moved into a small apartment nearby, and the kids started splitting their time between us. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. As for me, I found solace in the routines of daily life, work, parenting, and the quiet moments in between. The anger that had consumed me began to fade, replaced by a cautious sense of hope. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt ready to face it. The scars of betrayal didn't disappear, but they became part of the story I carried forward. And as I looked at my kids, my business, and the life I was rebuilding, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't broken. I was still standing. And that was enough.